Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. It's Lady Victoria here with Victoria School of Etiquette. I am your etiquette educator. Let me let me recheck my mic. Okay, yes, I should be good there. So, I'm sorry. Lady Victoria with Victoria School of Etiquette, where we offer a solution to your etiquette dilemmas. Listen, happy Valentine's Day to those of you that are celebrating Valentine's Day with your loved one, your significant other, your spouse, or if you're just celebrating yourself. Happy Love Day. Happy Love Day. Um, I am on this afternoon. This is the afternoon edition. Usually I come on in the morning, but this is the afternoon edition of Mind Your Manners Mondays. Mind Your Manners Monday. And our question on today comes from a um, query that was submitted to me by someone that wanted to know, are manners the same everywhere? Are manners socially acceptable? Good afternoon. Thank you for joining the broadcast. And if you can, I would appreciate if you would just say hello and let me know where you are tagging in from. I think I should be able to see you on every platform except YouTube. If you're responding on YouTube, I won't see your response until afterwards. But if you're here and you're able to just say hello and let me know where it is that you are chiming in from, I'd appreciate that. So, anywho, are manners the same? Are manners always the same? Are manners always socially correct or acceptable everywhere? I think the answer to that really depends upon where you are. And I think I need to do perhaps just a little bit of education again. I have done this before, but a little bit of an education on the difference between manners and etiquette. Okay, the difference between manners and etiquette. So let's talk about that a little more. I don't mind talking about it all of the time because it's my favorite subject. So I can talk about it anytime, all of the time. So our manners the same everywhere that you go. Your manners should be the same everywhere you go. There is a difference between manners and etiquette. They are related, they go together hand in hand all of the time, but there is a difference between the two. Okay, so etiquette again are the protocols and principles surrounding the manners that we carry out. Etiquette are the protocols and principles that we set in society that we actively carry out. So, etiquette. I'm sorry, is the why of why we perform the manners that we do. Etiquette principles do not change from the time that historians first discovered the maxims of Ptolemy. And if you follow me regularly, you more than likely have heard me talk about Ptolemy before. He was an Egyptian advisor around the year 2500 BC. He wrote the maxims of etiquette for his son, who was succeeding him as vizier at that time. Now, in Egyptian society, the king or the pharaoh never had someone succeed to that position. Good afternoon. Thank you for watching. They never had someone succeed to that position that was as young as his son was. I mean, he was an adult, but he was a young adult. He had not served in the office of ministry alone by himself. He did serve under Pharaoh, and he did serve in the palace, but at the instruction and discretion of his father, Ptolemy. So when Ptolemy stepped down, when he more or less retired, and he passed the torch on to his son, who learned everything about etiquette and manners in royal behavior. That's what he wrote about at that time. Being the Egyptian vizier, he was like the city administrator. He was second to the pharaoh and city administrator. He had a very large responsibility, not just to the palace alone, but overseeing the things in the city and letting the pharaoh know what things needed his attention and what did not. And as he had a body of men in the palace under him that served under him at that time, of course, it was extremely important that they knew how to deport themselves in various areas of ministry. And when I say ministry, that's how it was referred to at that time in the palace, serving under those ministerial positions or serving in those ministerial positions. When they had diplomats from other places coming to the palace, they needed to know how to deport themselves and how to entertain and see to those other diplomats, pharaohs, kings, people in political positions that were coming to them. So this is why he began to write it. And archaeologists discovered the book, this Maxims of Ptolemy, when they discovered his tomb many years later. Now, down through the years and centuries, there have been so many books written on manners in Western society and American society. We know that Emily Post is oftentimes regarded as the highest authority on etiquette when it comes to America. But then you have King Louis the 14th, who also had a book of etiquette for those that served him at that time. So etiquette principles have remained the same since the time of Ptolemy, since before Emily Post. There are many others that's written before her. Again, like I said, King Louis the 14th, and many, many, many others that have come behind Emily Post and others that have written books, volumes of books on etiquette. The principle of etiquette, with the research that I've done, has remained the same across the board. Manners, on the other hand, are the carrying out, the actual living, the day to day practice of those principles. Saying hello when you see someone, when you're greeting someone, it is polite to say hello. The principles and the manners are predicated on the tenets that have been set forth by society as a whole, and then that we look to as the authority in that arena to state what those manners are. Loosely, manners are making people feel comfortable around you, being kind and considerate, okay, and behaving in manners that are socially acceptable to the group or subgroup that you belong to. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining the broadcast. So, when you ask, are manners socially acceptable always in every situation? The answer is yes, and it could also be no. The manners that you exhibit in everyday society, that you play out in everyday society, some of those same manners you execute if you were visiting the Queen of England. But if you're visiting the Queen of England, you're in a completely different place than the United States. This is the Western world. And manners originated originally and were written for royalty and people of the upper middle class. So, if manners are making people feel comfortable around you and being kind and considerate and operating in an ethical manner, you would do that no matter what social group or even a subset of a social group that you belong to. That never changes. Okay. I'm sorry. Your manners will change depending upon what group you're in. But the principles say that you make others feel comfortable around you. How do you do that? By saying hello, by greeting them. Centuries ago in Europe, the correct way to address a person was, how do you do? Not hello. Not hello. But now we say hello, and you don't have to be so formal. You don't have to exercise such aristocracy, if you will. Manners is very simple. Manners are common sense things that you think to do. One of the examples that I use all the time is etiquette principles and protocols dictate that when you enter into a room, whether you know the people or not, the onus is on you to introduce yourself to others. It is on you to introduce yourself to others. Even if you know other people in the room, you don't necessarily wait for someone to come over and introduce you. If someone is expecting you, once they know that you have arrived, they will more than likely take you around and introduce you to others in the room. But if that doesn't happen, perhaps in the first 5 or 10 minutes, as you enter into the room, probably without your coat and all of that gear, that's going to be taken somewhere else to the coat room and what have you. If you're attending a business event or a social event, once you enter in, you come in and just say hello, introduce yourself. Hello, I'm Lady Victoria. How are you? Okay. And it may not be appropriate for me to introduce myself that way in that setting because this is my social media name. My name is Victoria, but I can drop the lady. I can just say, hello, my name is Victoria. And you extend your hand, and it is still correct and polite to do so. Okay. Now, there's a way to introduce yourself. Okay. There's deference. So if you're introducing yourself to someone that is older than you don't know their name. So you're giving them your full name. That's an indication that you're unacquainted perhaps with that person, or because they're older, or because they are in a higher position than you are. If you are attending something that's relative to your job, like a dinner party at your job or some other social setting, if it is a lawyer, a doctor, people that hold titles, when you introduce yourself to them, you use your full name. That's an indication to them as well, in case they are unaware, but they probably are not. Then they introduce themselves to you using their full name and oftentimes their title. So if they introduce themselves to you as, I am Dr. Lawrence Williams, then when you greet them back, hello, Dr. Williams, it's my pleasure to meet you. Correct? That is the correct way to do it. I've talked about that before, about introducing yourself to people and exercising deference when you do so. Is just giving respect to the older individual or to the person that has a position than you do, or a person whose credentials are always associated with them. If you were to meet the president, you wouldn't walk up to him and say, hi, Joe Biden. It's considered disrespectful. You would always address him as president. Even our presidents that are post, they're out of office. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining the broadcast. Out of the office, you always, always, always address them by that title. President Barack Obama. He's always going to be, he's no longer a serving president, but he is always entitled to that credential. So he's always referred to in that way. Military personnel, they are always referred to, even if they are non-active, if they are out, you get to a certain level, you're always associated and with that credential. So it is always used when you're addressing an invitation. That invitation always contains their credential. If you are announcing them publicly and they are no longer serving and they've been out of service for a while, you still use the credential, but then you would say retired, or you would use the abbreviation RET. You use the abbreviation that the branch of service uses to recognize their servicemen and women. So there are ways to make that introduction. But why do we do it? Why do we do it? Because we've established ourselves as a society that we want to make others comfortable around us. It is respectful and it is honorable to do so. And so manners is the why. Okay. The principles and the protocols is a foundation for it. And so manners is actually the carrying out of it. So are manners always socially acceptable everywhere. It depends upon what environment you're in. In a business setting, in a social setting, if you are, again, whether it's something for your job, if you're going to, like a party or a dinner or something that you have been invited to and it's black tie, the way you deport yourself in that environment should be indicative of the environment that you're in. So in that environment, you're not going to walk up people with the head nod. You're not going to walk up to people and just use a head nod. Mm-mm. That's unacceptable in that environment. But if you're hanging out with your boys and you are getting ready to go shoot some hoops, that's completely different. So the way you deport yourself in that environment, in that social setting, is completely different. So the head nod is appropriate in that environment. And you can do that, and no one's going to give you the side eye. But if you're at a black tie or all white event, if you're at a political setting, if you're in a church environment, you more than likely won't do that. Now, you may do that even with your boys at church, with your crew. You all can do that. Hey, what's up, bro? Happy Sunday, you know. Or to ladies, hey, girl, hey, sis, how you doing? You may greet each other in that manner, informally. But if you're greeting the first lady of the church or any other official of the church, that is not a greeting that you would exercise. You would not deport yourself in that manner. She's the first lady. She is the church mother. She is a missionary. You greet them differently. So, are manners socially correct all of the time? It depends upon what setting you are in. The setting should determine how you deport and how you carry yourself. I've said this before too, because I'm an etiquette instructor and educator. Um, I share the information that I have with you. I caution my clientele all the time with this phrase: the manners that you practice in private are the ones that will show up in public. So, when you are in a public setting, just be mindful. Just be mindful of how you carry yourself. So, this is why I say once you become aware of how a mannerism or a manner or behavior should be carried out, practice it, especially if you think that you're going to be in an environment that calls for you to do so. So, practice it, get it down pat to the point where you're comfortable with it. And so when you enter into an environment that you normally aren't in, excuse me, you automatically switch gears mentally. You switch gears. This is not a homegirl setting. This is not you with your girl crew and you all have gone out for, coffee and dessert and you're sitting at the table and, you can discuss things that you would discuss together. But good afternoon. Thank you for joining the broadcast. But when you're in a different situation, if you're going out to dinner, with brass from the job, or you're going out to dinner with officials from your church, you automatically switch. You automatically switch. You do not behave in a way that's common with them. You behave in a way that gives them the respect that they deserve. Now, is it going to be different if you are friends with them? He's your pastor, but you all are friends. Then, yes, your behaviors may be a bit more relaxed. But again, when you're in a setting with other individuals, you want to deport yourself in a manner that's always respectful. That's always respectful. Your friendship doesn't go away. And when you're in a different setting with those very same people, then you can relax a little bit and you can express yourself in a different way. But in a different setting, you want to behave according to that setting. and always give them the respect and the honor that is due them. Now, I want to talk about manners that are appropriate in different subsets or different social settings of society. Okay. What's acceptable with you and your boys? Good afternoon. Thank you for joining the broadcast. When you're in a setting with people that you know, family members or close friends or acquaintances, and you all are all sitting around and you're just having a good time and shooting the breeze, and it's an informal dinner party that you're at your home or they're at yours or whatever the situation is, how you behave in that environment, the social norms that you present or the way you deport yourself in that environment, that is completely acceptable. Okay. But if you're hanging out with a group of doctors and lawyers, that behavior won't be acceptable. And there are some things that some people do in certain circles that's exclusive to their circle. When professional people are hanging out with one another, say you have a group of doctors and they're hanging out with one another, they're having lunch, they've gotten a break and they're having lunch together and they're sitting around chatting with their colleagues, and the husband or the wife, the spouse or someone shows up for lunch as well. And they're talking shop, they're talking doc talk, they're talking medical ease, if you will. So the person that's not in that environment and not familiar with that language and not familiar with the protocols that they operate in and by in that environment, it is considered a little bit rude to consistently go on with that kind of behavior or that kind of conversation, because you completely leaving the outsider out. And oftentimes that's how they feel. Now, what the outsider can do, the outside individual, if they start talking about, cardiac surgery and making references to a patient and the different things that happened and this happened, oh, and their veins looked this way. I mean, I don't know medicalese because I'm not a doctor. Okay, but if they start talking in that way, how you can include yourself in that conversation is to begin to politely ask questions. So, oh, well, what did you mean when you said that his veins were flattened? What exactly does that mean, and what does that do to the body? So you can begin to ask questions to be inclusive. And then those individuals should revert to being kind and considerate by including you, by answering the question, but answering the question in a way that you can understand, not using all of the medical terminology to get the point across, because you've already made it clear that you have no idea what they're talking about. You say, well, I'm unfamiliar with this. If you're a doctor of a different type, you might be a dentist. Okay. And so you don't know about cardiac surgery. You know about teeth and gums and things of that nature. So you might jump in where you think can fit in. But the polite thing to do in a social situation like that, what would be considered proper etiquette behavior, will be to include that person at their level. You include them at their level. And if you begin to ask questions and just saying, oh, I didn't understand what you mean by that. What does that term mean? Well, I'm not a doctor, so I'm not as familiar with the lingo as you are. If they continue in that way of speaking that way or answering your questions still in a way that leaves you clueless, then you begin to think to yourself that this is unfair, or you just begin to feel like an outsider. And so you just a bump on the log sitting there. And the only thing you can do is just, yeah, oh, yes. That's all you can do, because they've not included you. They've not changed their behaviors, their mannerisms, how they're speaking and how they're communicating to a level that you can understand. You're a non-medical person and you have a group of medical professionals sitting there. So would that be socially acceptable in the circle that you're in? No. because you have an outsider there that doesn't know. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining the broadcast. You have an outsider that doesn't know that lingo. They're not associated with, medical behavior and terminology and those things. So it would be considered rude. So when you find yourself in a situation where you are amongst a group of people and you're discussing a subject or topic that's unknown to an individual in the group, you can try to draw them in by, when you speak, you look at them instead of looking at your other colleagues. They already know, but you can make eye contact with that person, and then knowing that they're unaware of what it is you're talking about or what it all means, you can say, you don't mind if I break it down for you and explain it this way, especially if they've asked a question. But if they've not asked the question, but they seem to be interested just by continuing to make eye contact and continuing to make physical gestures, that's letting you know that they'd like to be included, but they don't know how to jump in. So these things happen in different subsets. It just depends on the subset that you are in, the group that you are in at that time. What is considered socially acceptable or relevant? If you are a more mature adult, good afternoon. Thank you for joining the broadcast. If you're a more mature adult and you're having a conversation, perhaps with your grandchildren, now that's probably going to be interesting because you're in your 50s and your grandchildren, they may be teenagers or preteens, and they may be talking about anything on social media, something about their phones or something that happened at school, and they may be using language that you are unfamiliar with just because that's the way that they speak. That's the way this generation communicates. So with me, I just asked my grandchildren, what do you say? Okay, could you tell me what that means? Because, honey, listen, we didn't use that terminology when I was growing up. It's not bad. I'm not saying that they're using cuss words or anything like that. They're just speaking in the language ease that they are comfortable with. So there's a generational divide there. So you bridge that generation by asking questions and letting them know that you need to, again, communicate in a way because you're trying to understand where they are, especially if you want to be abreast of what's going on, not just in their life, but in their world. So sometimes we have to, as the older, mature individual, we have to figure out and learn ways to immerse ourselves in our children or in our grandchildren's world so that we have a better understanding of what's going on in their world. If it's going on in their world, and it's across social media platforms, and if you aren't, a social media guru, you don't know all of what it is that they're talking about in the language that they are using. Then you want to ask questions. Good afternoon. I mean, it seems like someone's joined the chat, but I don't know why it's coming up. You want to ask questions so that you know. Another scenario of different socially acceptable behavior in one environment that's may not be socially acceptable in another environment is the community in which you live. In the community where you live, they may speak a certain way, they may use a certain jargon that you are unfamiliar with. You're not from that community. I'm just using as an example where I grew up in the city of Chicago. There's lingo and language that they use on the west side that they might not use on the north side of town. They may have use different lingo, and in different communities, it can mean different things. So you want to be careful. If you go into a community, you're going to visit someone or something, where you're going to spend the summer, at a relative's home in a different state, in a different town, and the language and the community, the language and the lingo that they use in that community may be different from what you are accustomed to. Doesn't mean that it's wrong, not necessarily. In a larger scope, it might seem unacceptable, but it may be completely acceptable and correct in that environment. So you need to know that as well. These are the subsets that I'm talking about Everyone that has a profession, they usually have a way of communicating in ways that might be different from other people that's not in that subset. It's a subset because who we all are globally, right? A community or a group of people. So we have standard manners and protocols that we all follow. But in a subset of this entire society, you have a group of musicians and they may use lingo over here that you don't use. Lawyers over here, they have theirs. Doctors over here, they have theirs. You know, other medical professionals, they may communicate differently. I remember a gentleman that I met years ago, a friend of mine. He drove a truck for waste management um, in the city that he lived in, and I remember one time we were going somewhere, and he used some kind of hand movement when he saw another guy in the truck going into the community that he had just entered out from. And I was like, my goodness, what was all that about? That was a funny wave. He's like, no, it's not a wave. He said, it's how we communicate. I'm sending him a message. I'm letting him know what's going on in the community that he is about to enter into. Is it good? You know, is it clean? Does he have a lot of trash to pick up? What it's like? He said, I just left that community, but it wasn't my area. So I'm letting him know. And I'm sure that truckers on the road, I know that they have a language and a lingo that they use. It may not be verbal because for these waste management drivers, the lingo wasn't verbal, but they had a hand language, that they used. They had signs and symbols that they used to let the other person know what's going on. Now, this might not be the best example, but it's the same thing in gangs. It's the same thing in gangs. They have hand symbols that they use. It is a physical language that they use to communicate to those in that circle, and they know what that language means. They have other words that they use too that lets the others know what they mean when they say certain things. It's time to ride, load up, things like that. But they also have hand signals in that they use to communicate. If you're outside of that environment, most people do know, but if you're outside of that environment, you may not know what it means. Is it socially acceptable in that subgroup of people? Yes, for them it is. But if they're in a completely different environment, it's not socially acceptable. But it's not something that they share openly either with the public. That's their method of communicating in the circle that they are in. So they keep it close. They keep it close. Other gang members of a different affiliation may have something similar, or one gang might understand what another gang is trying to say. And so when they see that message, they can take it back to their camp and say, hey, this is what they're planning. This was going down. Is it always correct in every circle? No. It may not be socially acceptable, and it may not be correct for you, but you're not in that environment. So it's not relative to you. So it seems incorrect and is not socially acceptable for you because you are outside of that environment. But the traditional manners, and again, the standards and the protocols, the principles that are referred to as the etiquette, that's the foundation. The etiquette is the foundation for how we carry out our manners. That doesn't change. From the maxims of Ptolemy to Socrates, to who else? Oh gosh, now I'm forgetting all of the names. All of these early philosophers and educators, they wrote etiquette principles too, and they've not changed. Now, some of them are relaxed because originally, as I stated earlier, they were written for Um, aristocracy. They were written for the upper crust. They were written for people in high places, the kings and the pharaohs and dignitaries and like that. But then, as times changed, the manners changed. The principles and the protocols did not. They are still the same. But manners change as we grow and evolve, but some things stay the same. Okay? So as society grows and evolves, we no longer have to say, and even in the UK, they don't always walk up to a person and say, "How are you today?" They now also say hello. The handshake has been around in various forms for centuries. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining the broadcast. The handshake has been around for centuries, for absolute centuries. It is the most recognized form of greeting and welcome across the world. In some countries, the handshake is different than in the Western world. I did this broadcast before too. It's different in the Western world. And there are even some parts of the world where the handshake isn't acknowledged as much as a different form of greeting. If you go to the East, in China, you need to know that they bow. You need to know that in certain parts of that part of the country, it is disrespectful to look a senior in their eyes or senior exec, and it doesn't matter if it's someone personal that you know, or you're in a business meeting, a mastermind group, and you're meeting them. You need to know the correct protocol. So it does differ where you are. There are things that they do in Germany that's acceptable there that's not acceptable here in the United States. There's some places when you go to dine in our Western world, it's considered rude for us to burp or belch at the table. Do you know in other parts of the country they want you to belch and burp? For them, it's a sign that you enjoyed your meal and it's compliments to the chef or the cook. These are things that you need to know, especially if you travel. I say this all the time. If you travel, you're a business person and you travel and you're going to different regions, and I'm sure that you do this before you get there. But if not, find out. Find out what is permissible, especially when dining, and especially if you're going to Europe, please educate yourself. Most Europeans look at American etiquette as substandard. Substandard. So you need to know and be aware of what is correct according to the environment that you are in. Do you try to assimilate yourself and behave as they do? Definitely, you should. You should. So that you don't seem rude, that you don't appear rude, that you don't offend your host or your hostess. So you want to know what is acceptable and what isn't. But generally speaking, across the Western world, most manners are going to be correct. If you are a part of what I refer to as a subgroup and you have manners uh, in that subgroup that's accept, use them in that group. But when you enter into the general population, then you know to change. Because again, you will appear offensive to others, unkind, inconsiderate, and maybe it doesn't matter to you that you're labeled as such, but it should to a degree, because no matter what situation or environment that you're in, you want to present yourself as you want to present yourself well, and you want to present yourself and deport yourself in a manner that only brings positive attention to you, not negative attention. And then you want to be a good example for those that are around you. Those that are around you. If you have children, you have grandchildren, your coworkers in the workplace, uh, the members of various groups or societies that you might belong to. Uh, if you belong to a local church or your local church assembly, you always want to put your best foot forward. So, person that submitted the question, I hope that they are watching and that you got the answer that you wanted, since we did agree that this would be a public scenario to have this question answered. So, again, I say to you that if you have questions and you would like for me to answer them, if you want Lady Victoria to answer your question or to respond to a comment that you have, um, on a subject matter, one that I've taught, or perhaps one that I've not taught, if you want me to address it, I am more than happy to do so. If you want me to address it here on a live public platform, let me know that. But send your question to my email address, which is VSETC16 at gmail.com. It's an acronym for Victoria School of Etiquette Training and Consulting, the number 16 at gmail.com. If you use the hashtag Ask the Etiquette Lady, all one phrase, hashtag Ask the Etiquette Lady, if you know that, um, then use that hashtag. Use that hashtag and it will show up as important in my email. And I'm going to put it here also in the comment section so that you know if you have a question you want me, oh gosh, typos here. But if you have a question that you want me to answer publicly, then just use the hashtag Ask the Etiquette Lady, send it to VSETC16 at gmail.com. I will get the question. I will contact you. We'll have a short discussion about it. And then we will go forward from there. We'll go forward from there. So I want to thank all of you, those of you that chimed in, those of you that responded on the various platforms. I thank you and I appreciate you. Please don't forget to like and share. Please don't forget to like and share across your various social media platforms. I appreciate that. Again, Lady Victoria here. I am your etiquette educator, making my best attempt to help you and assist you with all of your etiquette dilemmas. So just let me know if you're just now chiming in. Please be kind and rewind, and so you can hear the question of the day and the answer that I've given. Again, if you want me to answer a question publicly, email me at vsetc16 at gmail.com using the hashtag Ask the Etiquette Lady, all one phrase, and I'll be more than happy to respond to that. So thank you for joining. Thank you for liking and sharing. Until the next time, this is Lady Victoria signing off. Until the next time, meet again. Bye for now.